I am Tara, 33 years old, and my family just tried to sell my work for $90 billion, leaving me with nothing. They thought they could erase me simply because I was the wrong kind of daughter. Sitting at the long mahogany table surrounded by the elite executives of Titan Dynamics, I took a sip of water. My mother Helen adjusted her designer pearls, smirking at me from across the table. She leaned in close, her voice a condescending whisper. Tara, be a good girl and stay quiet. Pity works wonders for people who do not know the truth. I just smiled. Within 24 hours, they would realize they had sold a hollow shell, and I held the keys to the empire. A silver spoon clinking against crystal cut through the conversation. My father, Pastor Marcus, stood at the head of the table. He smoothed his tailored suit, wearing a signature megachurch smile that commanded attention from everyone in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, my father boomed, his voice echoing with practiced charisma. Today marks a historic moment for Apex Robotics and our family. Titan Dynamics has formally agreed to acquire our company for $90 billion. Polite applause erupted around the room. My brother Henry puffed out his chest. Henry was the figurehead CEO, an Ivy League graduate who spent more time golfing than working. Beside him sat his wife Paige. She looked at me with an unmistakable sneer, her eyes dripping with elitist disdain. As the founder of this family, my father continued, raising his glass. I am announcing that the $90 billion acquisition funds will be transferred directly to my son Henry. He is the true leader of Apex Robotics and the one who will carry on our family's male legacy. To Henry. The executives raised their glasses. I placed my water glass down with a sharp thud that echoed in the sudden silence. Excuse me, I said, cutting through the celebratory atmosphere. You are handing 100% of the sale to Henry. The built the artificial intelligence infrastructure that Titan is buying. I wrote the medical algorithms. Henry barely knows how to format a spreadsheet. The Titan executives exchanged confused glances. The CEO of Titan Dynamics, a sharp-eyed man sitting near my father, raised an eyebrow but remained silent. Henry let out a patronizing laugh. Tara, please, you are just a data analyst. You typed some code in the back room. Do not try to steal the credit for my leadership and vision. Your vision? I challenged, standing up from my chair. Without my algorithms, those medical robots are just expensive scrap metal. I have been working unpaid for 4 years while you took the salary and the credit. Before Henry could respond, my mother slammed her hand onto the table. The holy facade she wore for her congregation vanished, replaced by the bitter woman I had always known. Sit down and shut your mouth, Tara, Helen snapped, pointing a manicured finger at my face. You are acting exactly like you did when you were 18. You threw a tantrum when your father and I mortgaged our house to pay for Henry's Harvard tuition instead of your Spelman College degree. You have always been an ungrateful child. We sacrificed everything so Henry could lead this family, and you expect to take his money. It is not his money, Mother, I replied, keeping my tone deadpan despite the rage boiling in my chest. It is the valuation of my technology. The technology you told me was a waste of time because I should be focusing on finding a husband. You are delusional, Paige chimed in, crossing her arms with obvious disgust. You have always been too loud and too ungraceful to understand high-level business. You are embarrassing yourself. This is a billionaire's table. You do not belong here. My father nodded, looking at me with cold eyes. Your sister-in-law is right. You are a disruption. I will not let your bitterness ruin Henry's moment of glory. As of this minute, you are officially terminated from Apex Robotics. You are no longer welcome in our home. You are exiled. The cold finality of his words hung in the air. The Titan Dynamics team watched the scene unfold with uncomfortable fascination. They were witnessing the ugly, toxic underbelly of the so-called model family. I looked at Henry, smirking triumphantly, already imagining the sports cars he would buy. I looked at Paige, practically glowing with satisfaction. And I looked at my parents, so blinded by obsession with their golden son that they were willing to throw their daughter to the wolves. They desperately wanted me to scream. They wanted me to cry and beg for a piece of the pie so they could call me unstable and validate their narrative. Instead, I calmly picked up my purse and pushed my chair in. So you are selling the company to Titan Dynamics today? I asked, looking directly at my father. We are selling our business, my mother corrected with a triumphant laugh. And you are getting absolutely nothing. Now leave. Understood, I said smoothly. I turned my gaze to the CEO of Titan Dynamics, who was watching me with intense scrutiny. I offered him a polite, brief nod. I wish you the best of luck with your $90 billion purchase, gentlemen. You are going to need it. Without another single word, I turned my back on my family and walked out. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of my father resuming his arrogant toast. They had no idea what they had just done. They believed they had successfully discarded the black sheep, securing their wealth and status forever. But as I walked down the hallway, a genuine smile spread across my face. They had sold the company, yes, but they did not sell the patents, because they did not own them. I owned them all. I had barely taken 2 steps toward the heavy oak doors when a sharp voice stopped me dead in my tracks. Get back here, Tara. We are not finished with you just yet. It was Paige. I paused, my hand hovering inches away from the brass door handle. Slowly, I turned around to face the long mahogany table. The executives from Titan Dynamics were watching me like hawks. I could see the confusion brewing in their eyes. They had come to celebrate a massive acquisition, but instead, they were getting a front-row seat to a spectacular family implosion. I walked back toward my empty chair with deliberate, measured steps. I refused to let them see even a single ounce of weakness. Paige stood up, her perfectly manicured fingers clutching a crisp piece of paper. She wore a sickeningly sweet smile, the kind of smile that hid pure venom. She stepped forward and slammed the paper down, sliding it forcefully across the polished wood until it stopped right in front of me. I looked down. It was a severance check made out to my name. The amount was exactly $50,000. Consider this a final act of charity from your brother, Paige said, her voice dripping with absolute condescension. Take the $50,000 and disappear. We all know you have absolutely nothing else to your name. She crossed her arms, looking me up and down with blatant disgust. You need to understand your place, Tara. You are simply too loud and entirely too ungraceful to blend in with our new circle of friends. Henry is about to become a very prominent billionaire. We will be attending high society galas, hosting charity dinners, and mingling with the global elite. The last thing we need is you showing up and embarrassing the family with your aggressive attitude and your cheap clothes. The blatant disrespect hung heavily in the suffocating silence of the boardroom. She was deliberately trying to break my spirit right in front of the most powerful tech executives in the country. She wanted me to feel small. She wanted me to break down, cry, and grab the check like a desperate beggar. For my entire long life, I had endured this exact brand of emotional warfare. They had constantly demanded my silence while simultaneously harvesting the fruits of my grueling labor. I remembered spending countless sleepless nights optimizing the machine learning framework, chugging cold, cheap coffee in a dark basement office while Henry was out taking expensive client dinners and playing golf on the company credit card. They honestly believed my brilliant mind was simply a tool meant exclusively for their financial gain. They desperately expected me to surrender gracefully. They expected me to vanish into the shadows without causing any unnecessary trouble whatsoever. My father, Pastor Marcus, nodded in agreement with his daughter-in-law. Take the money, Tara, he ordered, his tone devoid of any fatherly warmth. Use it to finally get your life together, but I am warning you right now, you are to sign a non-disclosure agreement before you leave this building. You will never speak to the press about Apex Robotics. You will never attempt to contact Henry, and you will certainly never try to claim any false credit for his incredible $90 billion success story. My mother Helen chimed in from the other side of the table. You should be on your knees thanking your brother for his immense generosity, she sneered. $50,000 is more than you deserve for typing away on a laptop while Henry did all the real heavy lifting. Now take the check, sign the paper, and walk out that door before we call the police and have you arrested for corporate trespassing. I stood completely still. I could feel the intense gaze of the Titan Dynamics chief executive officer burning into the side of my face. I was a smart man, and I knew he was silently analyzing every single word being spoken. He was looking at Henry, who was sweating slightly despite his arrogant posture. Then he looked back at me. I looked down at the severance check lying on the table. $50,000. It was a pathetic, insulting fraction of the $90 billion empire I had built from scratch. For a brief second, I felt a sharp sting of betrayal threatening to blur my vision. These were the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. They were my flesh and blood, yet they were treating me like a stray dog begging for table scraps. But I absolutely refused to cry. I refused to give Paige the satisfaction of seeing my tears. Instead of crying, I let out a low, steady laugh. The sound sent a visible ripple of unease through the room. I slowly reached down and picked up the severance check. Paige smirked, clearly thinking I had finally surrendered to her wealth and power. But her triumphant smile vanished instantly. I grasped the crisp paper with both hands and calmly tore it right down the middle. The sharp ripping sound echoed loudly. I placed the two pieces together and tore them again, reducing their insulting charity offer into worthless confetti. I let the torn pieces flutter down onto the polished mahogany table right in front of my brother's stunned face. I locked eyes with the confused Titan executives, ensuring I had their complete and undivided attention. "Enjoy your $90 billion metal shells, gentlemen," I stated, my voice ringing out with absolute unshakable confidence. "Because you just bought a completely brainless body." I did not wait for their reaction. I turned on my heel and marched straight toward the heavy oak doors. This time, nobody dared to call me back. I walked out of the boardroom, leaving a massive seed of doubt planted firmly in the minds of the buyers. The silence I left behind was deafening, and the true nightmare for my family was only just beginning. The morning sun had barely crested the city skyline when the aggressive pounding on my door began. I was already awake, sitting at my kitchen island with a cup of black coffee, watching the digital clock on my laptop tick past 6 in the morning. I knew they would retaliate quickly. My family never handled defiance well, and Paige was a woman who thrived on swift theatrical cruelty. The pounding echoed again, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of a heavy key turning in the lock. The door swung open, hitting the wall with a sharp thud. Paige marched into my apartment, flanked by two massive private security guards wearing tactical vests. She was dressed in an immaculate white designer suit, clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon. She looked around my modest living space with a deeply theatrical sigh of absolute disgust. "Get up, Tara," Paige ordered, her voice sharp and echoing in the quiet apartment. "You have exactly 10 minutes to pack your pathetic little life into a box and get out." I took a slow sip of coffee, unbothered by the giant men towering behind her. "It is 6 in the morning, Paige. Did Henry forget how to do his own dirty work, or did he just send his attack dog?" Paige's pale face flushed with sudden anger. She stepped forward, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Do not speak to me like that. You are a terminated employee living in a corporate leased apartment. Apex Robotics pays the rent for this unit, which means as of last night you are officially trespassing. I brought security to ensure you do not steal any company property on your way out the door." I calmly stood up from my stool. "I have no interest in stealing anything from a company that is about to crash and burn." "Oh, please," Paige scoffed, stepping out into the hallway and intentionally raising her voice so the neighboring doors would crack open. She wanted an audience. She wanted a public execution. "You are nothing but a jealous freeloader. You have been living off Henry's genius for 4 entire years. You honestly thought your little Spelman degree made you smart enough to sit at the billionaire's table. You are just a loud, ungrateful woman who cannot handle the fact that her brother is superior in every single way." Neighbors peered out, eyes wide at the unfolding drama. Paige reveled in it, playing the wealthy elite taking out the trash. "Look at you," she sneered, her voice dripping with venomous microaggressions. "You do not possess an ounce of grace. Henry offered you a generous $50,000 severance out of the pure kindness of his heart, and you threw it back in our faces, like a feral animal. Now you get absolutely nothing. Grab your cheap clothes and get out of my sight before I have these men physically drag you out by your hair." I looked at Paige. I looked at the two security guards who were silently waiting for my reaction. I felt adrenaline pumping, the urge to scream and defend my dignity. But I remembered my strategy. Anger is a weapon that can backfire if you do not aim it correctly. I did not need to fight her physically. I was about to slaughter her financially. Without uttering a single word in response to her racist, elitist tirade, I turned around and walked calmly into my bedroom. I did not bother packing my clothes, my shoes, or the expensive furniture my parents had bought me years ago as a guilt offering. I walked straight to my desk. I picked up my sleek silver laptop and a single heavy-duty external hard drive. I placed them carefully into my leather tote bag. Those two items were the only things of true value in this entire apartment. They held the future. I walked back into the living room, slipping my phone into my pocket. Paige looked disappointed. She had desperately wanted a screaming match. She wanted me to beg for a few more days to find a place. My absolute silence was unnerving her. "Is that it?" Paige demanded, eyeing my small bag. "You are leaving all this behind. Everything in this apartment belongs to Apex Robotics," I stated in a flat, emotionless tone. "And since Apex Robotics is about to face the full wrath of the federal government, I strongly suggest you take a very good inventory of these physical assets." I walked past the security guards, ignoring their intimidating presence. As I stepped out into the chilly morning air, Paige shouted one parting shot. "You will never work in the tech industry again, Tara. We will destroy your reputation." I did not look back. I walked into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the steel doors slid shut, cutting off the sound of Paige's shrill voice, I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation wash over me. For years I had allowed them to dictate my true worth. I had swallowed their insults during mandatory Sunday dinners, staying quiet, while Henry bragged about technical achievements he could barely comprehend. My parents had weaponized their megachurch community against me, painting me as the rebellious daughter who strayed simply because I preferred coding over choir practice. They used religion to demand submission and wealth to enforce my silence. Paige was just the final manifestation of their campaign to break me down. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They assumed my silence meant I was weak. I knew the gaping holes in their security. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened a secure encrypted application and logged into the administrative portal of NovaCore LLC. It was the corporate entity I had registered independently 4 years ago, entirely separate from my family, and holding the sole intellectual property rights to the artificial intelligence algorithms. The screen illuminated my face as I verified the total system lockdown. Sunday morning arrived with a torrential downpour, but the weather outside was nothing compared to the storm brewing on my laptop screen. Sitting on the edge of a lumpy mattress in a cheap motel room on the outskirts of Atlanta, I watched the relentless live broadcast of my parents' Sunday service. The sanctuary of Greater Hope Cathedral was packed tightly with 5,000 devoted members. My father, Pastor Marcus, paced across the massive glass stage, wiping sweat from his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. The choir swayed gently behind him, humming a low, supportive melody. "Sometimes the greatest trials do not come from the enemy outside, but from the enemy sitting at your own dinner table," my father boomed into his golden microphone. The congregation erupted in murmurs of agreement. My mother Helen sat in the front row, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the heartbroken matriarch to absolute perfection. "We work hard to build a legacy of excellence for our community," my father shouted, his voice echoing through the massive speakers. "We sacrifice, we bleed, we lift up our sons to lead the next generation of greatness. But the devil will use a prodigal, greedy daughter to try and steal her own brother's God-given blessings. The devil will use jealousy to tear down a righteous family empire, but we will not let the enemy win." "Amen, Pastor," the crowd roared back. I did not use my name, but in a community that tight-knit, he did not have to. Everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. He was weaponizing the pulpit to assassinate my character, preemptively turning our entire social circle against me, so that when the Titan Dynamics deal inevitably exploded, I would be the villain. My mother then stood up, taking the microphone from him. She faced the congregation, placing a dramatic hand over her heart. "When you raise a child with love and they repay you with theft, it breaks a mother's heart," Helen cried out, her voice trembling with practiced theatricality. "We gave her everything. We gave her a roof, an education, and a place in our company, and she repaid us by trying to hold her brother's incredible $90 billion success hostage. Please, church family, pray for her troubled soul." Right on cue, my cell phone, sitting on the cheap veneer nightstand, began to vibrate. Then it buzzed again, and again. It became a relentless, continuous hum. I picked it up and watched the notifications flood the screen. They were messages from the church elders, extended relatives, and people who had smiled in my face just 3 days ago. "You are a disgrace to this family, Tara," read a text from Auntie Loretta. "How dare you try to extort your own flesh and blood after everything your parents did for you?" "God sees your greed," messaged Deacon Thomas. "Henry worked his whole life for that robotics company. You are a shameful, jealous woman." Loud, bitter, and pathetic, read another message from a cousin I had not spoken to in 5 years. "You are ruining the greatest achievement our community has ever seen. Apologize to your brother." They were trying to break me. They were using the immense cultural pressure of respectability and family loyalty to crush my spirit into submission. They wanted me to feel so isolated, so universally hated, that I would surrender the rights to my own brain just to be accepted back into the fold. I stared at the hateful words scrolling down my screen. A few years ago, this level of coordinated public shaming would have devastated me. I would have called my mother crying, begging for forgiveness for a crime I did not commit just to make the public humiliation stop. But the woman sitting in that dim motel room was not the desperate approval-seeking girl they remembered. I calmly opened the settings on my phone, disabled all notifications, and tossed the device onto the other bed. I did not shed a single tear. Anger was a useless emotion if it was not channeled into strategy. I turned my attention away from the toxic broadcast and focused entirely on the heavy external hard drive plugged into my laptop. This was my weapon. This was the undisputed truth that no megachurch sermon could ever pray away. I opened the master file labeled Nova Core LLC. For the next 8 hours, I methodically fortified my legal defenses. I pulled up my official filings with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. The timestamps were crystal clear. I had registered the foundational algorithms for the predictive medical analytics 4 years ago, long before Apex Robotics ever landed their first major hospital contract. I had filed every single patent under my independent corporate entity, fully separating my intellectual property from my father's hardware company. I meticulously reviewed the labor laws and my historical employment status. My family had been too cheap and too arrogant to ever offer me a formal employment contract. Helen had explicitly refused to put me on the official Apex Robotics payroll. She had claimed that paying me a proper engineer's salary was a waste of company resources since I was just helping out the family business. They had classified me as an unpaid independent contractor, issuing me tax forms with $0 reported. That supreme arrogance was about to be their ultimate downfall. Under United States intellectual property law, because I was never an employee and because I had never signed an invention assignment agreement transferring my rights to Apex Robotics, I retained absolute 100% ownership of every single line of code I had ever written. They literally had zero legal claim to my algorithms. I cross-referenced the licensing agreements I had drafted but never executed with Apex. I checked the encryption protocols protecting the source code. I ensured that the digital trap I had woven into the software was completely bulletproof against unauthorized extraction. Every firewall was active. Every access key was securely randomized and linked exclusively to my biometric data. If Titan Dynamics or Henry attempted to reverse engineer the robotic brains, the system would immediately initiate an irreversible data wipe, rendering the $90 billion hardware completely useless. I was not just preparing for a family feud. I was preparing for a corporate war against one of the largest tech conglomerates in the world. I read through every legal statute regarding corporate fraud, intellectual property theft, and the strict Securities and Exchange Commission regulations governing mergers and acquisitions. By the time the sun set, casting long dark shadows across the cheap motel room's stained carpet, my documentation was an impenetrable fortress of legal and technical perfection. Let them preach. Let them send their hateful messages. Let them celebrate their stolen billions. They were standing on a fragile, rotting wooden trapdoor, and my hand was resting firmly on the lever. The heavy, oppressive silence in my extremely cheap motel room was suddenly broken by the sharp, jarring ringing of my cell phone. The bright caller ID flashed my older brother's name in bold letters across the cracked glass screen. Henry was calling. I stared at the vibrating device for a moment, watching it dance across the stained wooden nightstand. He simply could not resist the overwhelming urge to gloat tonight. I desperately needed to rub his stolen victory in my face to satisfy his incredibly fragile ego. I took a deep breath, cleared my throat to ensure there was absolutely no trace of emotion, and pressed the green answer button. I brought the phone up to my ear, keeping my facial expression perfectly blank. "Hello, Henry," I said calmly, making sure my voice was perfectly steady and completely devoid of the crushing devastation he undoubtedly expected to hear from me tonight. "Tara," Henry barked into the receiver, the chaotic background noise of clinking crystal glasses and booming laughter spilling through the tiny speaker. "I just wanted to call and check on our little exiled data typist. I really hope you found a nice, exceptionally cheap place to stay tonight. You are definitely going to need to get used to living on a very tight budget from now on." He let out a loud, obnoxious, drunken laugh. "I am currently standing in the exclusive VIP lounge of the most expensive club in downtown Atlanta, surrounded by people who actually matter. We are actively celebrating the absolute triumph of Apex Robotics. Do you want to know what I did today with the massive cash advance Titan Dynamics wired directly into my bank account?" I did not answer him, letting the cold, heavy silence stretch across the cellular connection. Henry did not even care. He was talking mostly just to hear his own voice speak. "I put a massive, non-refundable cash deposit on a $30 million mansion in Beverly Hills. It has 12 pristine bedrooms, a private indoor cinema, and a massive climate-controlled garage. Which is absolutely perfect, because I also bought a fleet of exotic supercars this afternoon. I purchased a customized Lamborghini, 2 brand new Ferraris, and a custom Bentley. I paid cash for the cars, Tara. Cold, hard, untraceable cash. I am living the luxurious life you always wanted, but were simply too stupid and too stubborn to grasp for yourself." "That is quite an impressive shopping spree," I replied calmly, keeping my tone perfectly neutral and analytical. "I am very glad you are enjoying the acquisition advance so much." "Oh, I am enjoying it immensely," Henry sneered, his voice dropping into a vicious, threatening register that cut through the background music. "And I am calling to give you one final serious warning. Paige and I have been talking to powerful corporate lawyers and top-tier industry executives today. If you ever try to contact Titan Dynamics or post on social media claiming you had anything to do with my medical robots, I will personally see to it that you are completely blacklisted from the entire United States tech industry. You will never write a single line of code for a reputable company ever again. I will make absolutely sure every hiring manager in Silicon Valley thinks you are a psychotic, disgruntled former employee who tried to extort her own loving family. You are a nobody, Tara. You have no money, no power, no influence, and no family left to protect you. Know your proper place and stay in the dirty gutter where you belong." A genuine wide smile slowly spread across my face in the dim yellow light of the motel room. He was so incredibly arrogant, so entirely blinded by his sudden influx of unearned cash, that he had no idea he had just handed me the perfect opening. "You are absolutely right, Henry," I said, my voice dripping with smooth, artificial submission. "I have no real power against you. I will stay completely out of your way from now on. Enjoy your beautiful new mansion and your fast supercars. You have certainly earned everything that is coming to you very soon." "Exactly," Henry spat back viciously. "Do not ever forget it, little sister." He ended the call with a sharp, aggressive click. I casually tossed the phone onto the empty bed next to me. The calm smile on my face deepened into a look of absolute icy determination. Henry had just foolishly confirmed that he had already spent a massive chunk of the Titan Dynamics advance money. He had knowingly signed non-refundable contracts and locked himself into binding, multi-million-dollar financial agreements based entirely on a $90 billion corporate acquisition that was fundamentally fraudulent. He had built his brand-new Beverly Hills castle on a deep foundation of quicksand, and he was completely oblivious to the danger. I turned my undivided attention back to my glowing laptop screen. The Nova Core master terminal was open and waiting patiently. I cracked my knuckles and placed my hands firmly over the keyboard, It was finally time to pull the plug. I navigated swiftly through the encrypted administrative portal, easily bypassing 3 complex layers of biometric security. I accessed the global registry for all Apex medical robots currently deployed in advanced testing facilities and top-tier hospitals across the country. These specific machines were scheduled to be rigorously audited by Titan Dynamics integration engineers first thing Monday morning. I highlighted the entire active fleet of robotic units. I typed in a complex command prompt designed to immediately sever the connection between the physical hardware and my proprietary artificial intelligence algorithms. The system asked for my final confirmation. I stared intensely at the flashing green cursor. I thought about my mother's cruel, dismissive words at the dinner table. I thought about my father weaponizing his entire church congregation against me today. I thought about Paige and her vile, racist insults. And I thought about Henry sitting in a VIP club recklessly spending millions of dollars he did not legally own. I hit the enter key hard. A blue progress bar flashed across my screen. 10%, 50%, 100%. The remote firewall lockdown was successfully executed. Every single medical robot bearing the Apex logo instantly went completely dark. Their mechanical limbs locked rigidly into place. Their diagnostic screens faded to pitch black. The brilliant predictive artificial intelligence that made them worth $90 billion retreated safely behind an impenetrable, heavily encrypted digital wall. The highly touted robotic fleet was now nothing more than a collection of extremely expensive, completely useless metal shells. The ticking time bomb was officially activated, and Titan Dynamics was about to discover the devastating truth. While Henry was busy standing in front of a mirror, picking out the perfect bespoke Italian tie for his anticipated victory lap, a state of absolute unmitigated panic was rapidly unfolding inside the subterranean integration labs of Titan Dynamics. At 7 in the morning, lead systems engineer David Aris sat before a bank of glowing monitors attempting to run the standard proprietary testing protocols on the newly acquired Apex Robotics fleet. He typed in the administrative bypass commands provided by Henry's team, expecting the medical algorithms to seamlessly integrate with Titan's global mainframe. Instead, his screen flashed a blinding hostile red. Access denied. Encryption protocol active. David frowned, adjusting his glasses. He signaled for 2 of his senior cybersecurity experts to join him at the terminal. Apex's figurehead CEO must have given us the wrong authentication keys, David muttered, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. Run a brute force decryption matrix. Let's just crack the outer firewall and pull the source code manually. For the next 2 hours, the elite cybersecurity team threw every advanced hacking tool in their multi-million-dollar arsenal at the robotic fleet's digital barrier. They tried ghost routing through the hydraulic feedback loops. They attempted to spoof the localized diagnostic ports. Every single attempt was violently rejected. The artificial intelligence wasn't just hiding, it was actively defending itself. The algorithm recognized their brute force attacks and dynamically shifted its cryptographic keys every 3 seconds. "This is impossible," one of the senior experts whispered, wiping a bead of cold sweat from his forehead. "This isn't standard commercial encryption. This is a military-grade biometric locked architecture. The AI is completely detached from the physical hardware. It's tethered to a remote server." "Trace the ping," David ordered, his voice tight with rising dread. "Find out exactly where the algorithm's actual brain is legally hosted." 10 minutes later, the terrifying truth materialized on their monitors. The trace did not lead to Apex Robotics. It bypassed Henry's company, entirely landing squarely on a highly restricted, independently registered corporate entity, Nova Core, LLC. David pulled up the United States Patent and Trademark Office database. There, in undeniable black and white, was the foundational registration for the predictive medical analytics algorithm. The sole proprietor and registered inventor was not Henry, it was Tara. David sprinted out of the subterranean lab, clutching the printed diagnostic reports. He bypassed 3 levels of security, bursting into the top-floor executive suite of the Titan Dynamics chief executive officer. "Sir, we have a catastrophic situation," David gasped, slamming the thick file onto the CEO's pristine mahogany desk. Apex Robotics doesn't own the artificial intelligence. They never did. The algorithms are locked behind an impenetrable biometric firewall owned by a completely independent corporation named Nova Core. We just authorized a $90 billion payout for an empty fleet of brainless metal mannequins. The CEO of Titan Dynamics froze his coffee cup, stopping halfway to his mouth. His sharp eyes scanned the printed patent registrations, taking in Tara's name. The puzzle pieces from the disastrous acquisition dinner suddenly snapped into place. He remembered the quiet, intense woman who had calmly told him he was buying a hollow shell. He remembered Henry's arrogant, dismissive laughter. The CEO's expression hardened into a mask of pure lethal granite. He immediately picked up his secure desk phone and pressed the speed dial for Titan's primary financial institution. "This is the CEO," he barked into the receiver. "I need you to execute an immediate hard freeze on the $90 billion wire transfer to Apex Robotics. Flag the transaction for suspected federal securities fraud. Not a single cent leaves our accounts. Then, get my lead corporate attorneys into the primary boardroom right now." The trap was fully set. All they had to do now was wait for Henry to blindly walk into it. Henry pulled his Lamborghini into the reserved parking space. It was Monday morning, and he stepped out wearing a bespoke Italian suit. He adjusted his silk tie, flashing whitened teeth at the security guards who escorted him through the gleaming lobby. He expected champagne flutes fawning congratulations and a golden plaque bearing his name as the genius who had revolutionized the medical industry. He swaggered into the private elevator, watching the floor numbers climb higher, completely ignorant of the sheer drop awaiting him at the top. He strutted through the double doors of the boardroom, ready to bask in his unearned glory. Instead of a celebration, he walked into a corporate execution. The massive room was freezing cold and dead silent. The chief executive officer of Titan Dynamics sat at the head of the table, his face carved from granite. Flanking him were 4 senior integration engineers and 3 corporate attorneys, with thick damning files stacked neatly in front of them. Henry faltered for a fraction of a second, his practiced smile wavering as he felt the intense hostile energy radiating from the men in the room. He quickly recovered, puffing out his chest and taking his designated seat, assuming this was just some bureaucratic formality they needed to clear up before the party could begin. The chief executive officer did not even offer a greeting. He leaned forward, steepled his fingers, and fixed his piercing gaze on my brother. "Henry, we have a serious problem," the executive stated, his voice dangerously low. "My integration engineers attempted to run their diagnostic tests on your fleet of medical robots this morning. They discovered that every single machine is completely unresponsive, the hardware is locked down, and the core artificial intelligence framework is entirely inaccessible. We require the master decryption keys immediately." Henry blinked, a nervous bead of sweat forming at his temple. He let out a forced, dismissive chuckle. "Oh, that is nothing to worry about, gentlemen," Henry lied smoothly, leaning back to feign confidence. "We are experiencing a minor server glitch. My tech team is sorting it out right now. You will have full access by tomorrow afternoon." "It is not a server glitch, Henry," the engineer snapped, sliding a printed diagnostic report across the table. "We bypassed your external hardware firewalls and traced the origin of the total system lockdown. The predictive medical analytics algorithm, the actual brain of the robots, is not registered to Apex Robotics. The digital infrastructure is legally owned and heavily encrypted by a separate corporate entity called Nova Core. The system requires biometric authentication that you clearly do not possess. You sold us empty, useless metal shells." Henry stared at the diagnostic report, the color draining rapidly from his face. His mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish, but no words came out. He had spent years ignoring the technical details of my work, and now his willful ignorance had trapped him in a corner. The chief executive officer stood up, towering over my terrified brother. "We authorized a $90 billion acquisition based on the explicit guarantee that Apex Robotics owned the proprietary artificial intelligence," he said. "I just got off the phone with our bank. I have officially frozen the $90 billion wire transfer. Not a single cent will enter your accounts." Henry shot up from his chair, genuine panic finally breaking through his facade. "You cannot do that," Henry shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "We signed a binding contract. I have already made substantial financial commitments based on that advance. You have to release those funds immediately." The corporate attorneys at the table scoffed in unison. One of them, a ruthless-looking woman in a sharp navy suit, opened her file. "That binding contract contains a standard representations and warranties clause regarding intellectual property ownership, Henry," she explained with lethal precision. "By signing that document, you legally swore that Apex Robotics owned the algorithms. You lied. That constitutes a material breach of contract which nullifies our financial obligations entirely." Henry grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white as his luxurious world began to collapse around him. "I can fix this," Henry pleaded, his arrogance gone, replaced by the whimpering of a man who knew he was drowning. "Just give me a few days. I will get you the access keys. I promise you I can get the software." The chief executive officer leaned in close, invading Henry's personal space. "You have exactly 24 hours, he demanded coldly. "You have 24 hours to produce the complete unencumbered intellectual property rights to the artificial intelligence algorithms. If you fail to deliver the legal ownership documents and the decryption keys, by this time tomorrow, Titan Dynamics will officially press federal charges against you and your family. We will bring in the Securities and Exchange Commission, and we will prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law for attempting to defraud a publicly traded company. You are looking at decades in federal prison for this little stunt. Now get out of my boardroom and fix this," the executive ordered, pointing sharply toward the heavy door. Henry stumbled backward, his face slick with sweat, nearly tripping over his own expensive leather shoes. He turned and practically ran out of the quiet room, his breathing shallow, ragged, and rapid. He sprinted down the long carpeted hallway, completely ignoring the stares of the corporate employees he passed. The beloved golden child was now nothing more than a terrified, pathetic criminal rapidly running out of time. He burst out of the towering glass headquarters into the bright sunlight and completely collapsed against the cold hood of his brand-new Lamborghini, gasping desperately for air. The brutal, inescapable reality of his total catastrophic failure crushed him instantly. He was in way over his head, and he finally realized with sickening dread that his survival depended entirely on the brilliant sister he had so cruelly exiled just 2 short days ago. The roar of a V12 engine shattered the quiet afternoon of my dingy motel parking lot. I did not even need to look out the stained glass window to know exactly who had just arrived. I sat calmly at the small veneer desk, watching the live security feed from the parking lot cameras that I had routed to my laptop. Henry slammed the door of his customized Lamborghini. A second later, Paige stepped out of the passenger side, her designer heels sinking into the cracked, weed-infested asphalt. They looked entirely out of place in this run-down area of Atlanta, but their faces were completely stripped of their usual smug superiority. Henry was sweating profusely, his expensive silk tie yanked loose around his neck. Paige looked frantic, clutching a leather folder tightly against her chest. They stormed toward my room, their previous arrogance entirely replaced by an unhinged, desperate rage. I closed my laptop, took a slow breath, and waited. The aggressive pounding on my door started exactly 3 seconds later. The cheap wooden frame rattled violently under Henry's heavy fists. I stood up, smoothed out my plain cotton shirt, and walked over to unbolt the lock. Before I could even turn the brass handle completely, Henry shoved his body weight against the door, bursting into the small room like a cornered animal. Paige followed closely behind him, her eyes darting around the peeling wallpaper and stained carpet with obvious disgust. Though her panic clearly outweighed her elitist sensibilities today, Henry did not bother with a greeting. He was breathing heavily, his eyes wide and bloodshot from sheer terror. "Give me the access keys right now, Tara," Henry demanded, his voice cracking with a pathetic mixture of fear and fury. "You have to unlock the firewall immediately. You are going to ruin everything." I crossed my arms and leaned casually against the doorway. "Hello, Henry. Hello, Paige. It is so lovely of you to visit me in the gutter where you told me I belonged just last night." Paige slammed the leather folder down onto the rickety motel bed. "Stop playing your stupid little games, Tara!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and trembling. "Titan Dynamics has frozen the entire $90 billion transfer. They are threatening to press federal fraud charges against us and send Henry to prison. You need to fix this right this second." Henry stepped forward, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me, but his hands were visibly shaking. "I am not asking you, Tara. I am ordering you as the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Robotics. You will sit down at that computer, you will hand over the master passwords, and you will sign this intellectual property transfer form immediately." He pulled a thick stack of legal documents from Paige's folder and shoved a pen toward my chest. "You are an employee of my company. Every single line of code you wrote belongs to me. Your work is company property, and withholding it is corporate sabotage. I will have you thrown in jail for extortion." I looked down at the pen trembling in his sweaty hand, and then I looked directly into his terrified eyes. I did not raise my voice. I did not step back. I stood my ground and smiled. "I am not going to sign anything, Henry," I stated with absolute unwavering certainty. "And I am certainly not giving you the decryption keys to my artificial intelligence algorithms. You are standing in this cheap motel room screaming about corporate sabotage, but you clearly have absolutely no understanding of how the law actually works." Henry slammed his fist against the wall, causing a cheap framed picture to rattle. "You work for Apex Robotics," he screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "I am your boss. You are my subordinate. The software belongs to the company." "I never worked for Apex Robotics," I corrected him smoothly, my voice slicing through his hysterical outburst like a perfectly sharpened blade. "I worked for myself, and that is the exact reason why your entire $90 billion empire is currently crumbling to dust." Paige scoffed loudly, crossing her arms defensively. "Do not be ridiculous. You worked in our office for 4 years. You are an employee." I turned my gaze to Paige, offering her a look of deep, profound pity. "You should have hired a competent labor attorney before you tried to sell a tech company, Paige. You never paid me a salary, Henry. You and our mother explicitly refused to put me on the official company payroll because you thought paying your sister a proper engineering wage was a massive waste of family resources. You handed me $0 tax forms for 4 consecutive years. You labeled me an unpaid independent contractor to save money and inflate your own profit margins. You wanted to exploit my brilliant mind for absolutely nothing." Henry swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously as the horrifying truth began to dawn on him. "Under United States law," I continued, articulating every single syllable with lethal precision, "an independent contractor retains absolute 100% ownership of their creations unless they explicitly sign an invention assignment agreement, transferring those specific rights to the company. You were too cheap, too arrogant, and too lazy to ever draft that paperwork. You never paid me for my labor, so you do not own the fruits of my labor. I retain 100% ownership of my creations. NovaCore LLC holds the exclusive patents to the predictive medical analytics. You do not own the software, Henry. You never did." The silence that followed my declaration was absolute and suffocating. The reality of his catastrophic error washed over Henry. He staggered backward, hitting the bed as his legs gave out completely. He sat down heavily, staring at the floor with hollow, dead eyes. Paige gasped, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. They realized their power was gone. They were ruined. But before Henry could even begin to articulate a pathetic excuse for his monumental negligence, the roar of a second heavy engine echoed through the motel parking lot. I glanced at the security feed on my laptop screen. A sleek black Mercedes SUV pulled up right next to Henry's customized Lamborghini. The doors opened, and my parents, Pastor Marcus and Helen, hurriedly stepped out into the oppressive afternoon heat. Clearly, Henry had called them in a blind panic the second he ran out of the Titan Dynamics headquarters, begging them to come fix the mess he had made. They had rushed across town to play their usual roles as the ultimate family fixers. They practically shoved their way through the open doorway of my motel room, instantly crowding the small space. Helen looked at Henry, who was practically catatonic on the edge of the bed, and then turned her gaze to me. Her strategy shifted instantly. The aggressive, bitter woman from the boardroom vanished, replaced by a terrifyingly accurate performance of a heartbroken loving mother. "Oh, Tara, my sweet girl," Helen cooed, taking a step toward me with her arms outstretched, tears welling up in her eyes on absolute command. "What is going on here? Why are you doing this to your own flesh and blood? We are a family. You cannot hold this grudge. You are going to send your only brother to federal prison over a silly little misunderstanding about paperwork." "It is not a misunderstanding, Mother," I replied, taking a deliberate step back to avoid her touch. "It is corporate fraud, and I am not doing anything to Henry. Henry did this to himself." My father Marcus stepped forward, puffing out his chest to project his booming pastoral authority. "Tara, the Bible commands you to honor your father and your mother," he preached, his voice echoing off the cheap motel walls. "We built the Apex brand to uplift this entire family. We are pillars of the community. If you do not unlock those servers and sign the intellectual property over to Henry right now, the federal government will investigate all of us. You will completely destroy our church's pristine reputation. You will ruin everything we have built. How could you be so selfish?" I looked at the two of them. It was a masterclass in toxic emotional manipulation. They were actively trying to weaponize my own conscience against me, using religious guilt and the illusion of family loyalty to make me surrender my life's work. "Selfish," I repeated, letting a cold, humorless laugh escape my lips. I looked directly into my father's eyes. "When you sat at that mahogany table and exiled me from this family, you looked me dead in the eye and told me that failures have to bear the consequences of their own actions. You told me my algorithms were a waste of time. You threw me out onto the street with absolutely nothing, perfectly willing to let me starve while you celebrated your stolen $90 billion. Helen dramatically placed a hand over her heart, letting a single tear fall down her cheek. "We were just trying to teach you tough love, Tara. We just wanted you to learn your place." "I did learn my place, Mother." I fired back, my voice completely devoid of the submission they desperately craved. "My place is at the head of a $90 billion empire. You made it abundantly clear that my brilliant mind was just a tool for your golden sun. When you thought you had all the money, I was a disruption and a bitter exile. But now that Henry is facing decades in a federal penitentiary for securities fraud, suddenly I am your sweet girl, and we are a family again." Marcus's face flushed with anger, his holy facade cracking to reveal the controlling patriarch underneath. "You are an ungrateful, wicked child. We sacrificed everything for you. You sacrificed nothing for me." I shouted the raw truth, finally silencing the room. "You mortgaged your house for Henry's Harvard tuition. You gave Henry the CEO title. You gave Henry the salary. You gave me $0 tax forms and a dark room to code in. I built the artificial intelligence that gave your hollow metal shells a soul. I own the patents. I hold the keys. And I am not lifting a single finger to save any of you from the consequences of your own blinding greed." Realizing that their toxic guilt-tripping was completely ineffective against my legal armor, my parents fell silent, exchanging terrified glances. The reality of their impending doom settled heavily over them. Paige was the first to break the stunned silence. Her initial shock violently morphed into a blinding, elitist rage. She snatched her cell phone from her designer handbag with trembling fingers and dialed a number on speed dial. "Get the legal team on the line right now," Paige barked into her phone, her voice shrill and commanding. "Yes, all of them. I do not care what time it is. We have a corporate extortion situation, and I need the bulldogs down here immediately." She turned to face me, planting her expensive heels firmly on the ground. "You think you are so brilliant, Tara," Paige sneered, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "You think you have found some clever little legal loophole that gives you leverage over us. My family has been crushing ambitious nobodies like you for generations. Our attorneys are sharks. You are sitting in a roach-infested motel room clutching a laptop, and you honestly believe you can hold up a $90 billion acquisition." Henry, seemingly emboldened by his wife's sudden burst of aggressive confidence, pushed himself up off the edge of the bed. "She is right, Tara," Henry warned, pointing a rigid finger at my face. "You are completely out of your league. We have the financial backing of Titan Dynamics and Paige's family estate. We will bury you in so much litigation that you will be spending the rest of your miserable life paying off legal fees. We will drag this out in federal court until you are entirely bankrupt and begging us to take the algorithms for free." I pulled out my phone subtly, ensuring the voice recording application I had activated the moment they pulled into the parking lot was still running perfectly. I held the phone casually by my side, making sure the microphone was unobstructed. You cannot sue me for extortion when I am simply defending my own intellectual property, Paige, I replied, maintaining a perfectly calm and conversational tone. I built the software. I registered the patents under NovaCore LLC. You have absolutely no legal standing to force a transfer. Legal standing means nothing when you have enough money to crush the opposition. Paige screamed, her face twisting into an ugly, furious mask. We knew you did not have the official employment paperwork. We knew you were not on the payroll. We did not care. You were just a useful tool, a convenient family member we could use to build the product. We knew we did not legally own the patents, but we sold them anyway, because we knew we could just crush you in court if you ever dared to speak up. You are a nobody. You have always been a nobody. Henry nodded vigorously, completely oblivious to the massive legal trap he was currently walking right into. We are the face of Apex Robotics, Henry shouted, his voice echoing loudly off the thin motel walls. We built the brand. We secured the hospital contracts. We pitched the vision to Titan Dynamics. We sold the entire package because we knew we could handle a minor technicality like your missing signature later. You are going to sign that transfer form right now, or our attorneys will destroy your entire existence. My heart raced with an intense, triumphant thrill. I had it. I had the ultimate irrefutable confession. Paige and Henry had just blatantly, loudly, and explicitly admitted on a digital recording that they knew they did not own the artificial intelligence patents, but had intentionally proceeded to sell them to a publicly traded company anyway. They had just confessed to deliberate, premeditated corporate fraud and federal securities violations. I want to make sure I completely understand your position, I said, prompting them to dig their own graves just a little bit deeper for the recording. You are explicitly admitting that you both knew Apex Robotics did not hold the legal rights to the predictive medical analytics algorithm when you signed the $90 billion acquisition contract with Titan Dynamics. Of course we knew, Paige yelled, throwing her hands up in the air in sheer frustration. We are not stupid. We just knew you would never have the guts or the financial resources to actually fight us. You are a weak, pathetic woman who has spent her entire life desperately seeking validation from your parents. We knew you would eventually cave. And you are going to cave today, Tara. Our attorneys will be here within the hour. They will draft a lawsuit for corporate sabotage and extortion, so massive it will make your head spin. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. I looked at the two of them standing there in their ruined designer clothes, desperately clinging to threats of litigation while actively confessing to federal crimes. They were so blinded by their elite privilege and their long history of abusing me that they literally could not see the executioner's blade swinging right toward their necks. You can bring every single expensive corporate attorney your family possesses, Paige, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute, unshakable power. You can threaten me with malicious litigation until you are blue in the face, but you absolutely cannot sue your way out of a federal criminal indictment. I am not signing your documents. I am not giving you the decryption keys. And I am certainly not going to let you steal my life's work. Your 24-hour deadline from Titan Dynamics is rapidly ticking away, Henry. I highly suggest you spend your remaining time looking for a very good criminal defense attorney because you are going to need one. Now, get out of my motel room before I call the local authorities and have you both arrested for trespassing on my private property. This entire conversation is officially over, and I have nothing left to say to you. Do not ever dare to show your faces in my presence again, because I am completely done dealing with your endless, exhausting lies. Henry and Paige stood frozen, the sheer force of my final statement pinning them to the stained carpet. Then self-preservation finally kicked in. Henry grabbed Paige by the arm and dragged her out the door. I slammed the door shut, sliding the deadbolt into place. I did not waste a single second watching them retreat through the window. I walked straight back to my laptop, waking the screen with a quick swipe of my finger. I opened my secure email client. In the drafts folder was a highly detailed document I had prepared the night before. It was an official whistleblower report addressed directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission Enforcement Division. It outlined the Apex Robotics fraud, complete with timestamps, patent registration numbers, and a transcript summary of the audio I had just recorded. I attached a copy of the audio file to the draft. I forwarded the entire package to Henry's personal and corporate email addresses, along with a simple message. You have exactly 12 hours before I hit send. Outside in the humid parking lot, Henry and Paige had barely reached the customized Lamborghini when Henry's phone chirped loudly. I watched them on my security feed. Henry pulled the device from his pocket, his hands still trembling uncontrollably from our confrontation. He stared at the screen, his brow furrowing in deep confusion before his eyes widened in absolute horror. He leaned against the sports car, his knees buckling as he read through the federal document. Paige snatched the phone, her eyes darting across the glowing screen as she absorbed the terrifying scope of my leverage. The transformation was instantaneous and violent. Paige let out a piercing scream that echoed across the empty motel parking lot. She threw the phone hard against Henry's chest. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Paige shrieked, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "She has a federal whistleblower report ready to file. She has the audio recording of us admitting to securities fraud. You told me she was bluffing. You told me she was just a pathetic, jealous sister who would eventually cave to a simple legal threat." Henry scrambled to pick up his phone, his face pale. "I did not know she had recorded us, Paige. I did not know she understood the legal framework this deeply. My parents always handled her. They always told me she was just a harmless, socially awkward coder who would never actually fight back against the family." "Your parents are complete idiots," Paige screamed, shoving Henry in the chest. "And you are even worse. I married a tech genius who was supposed to elevate my family's social standing. I did not marry a fraudulent, incompetent criminal who cannot even manage his own younger sister. Do you have any idea what will happen if she sends that email to the federal government? My family will be completely disgraced. I will be laughed out of every single country club and elite social circle in this country. And you will be sitting in a federal penitentiary for the next 20 years. "Stop yelling at me," Henry shouted back, his own panic morphing into defensive rage. "You are the one who pushed me to buy that $30 million mansion in Beverly Hills yesterday. You are the one who demanded the fleet of supercars before the Titan. Dynamics money even fully cleared the bank. You wanted the elite billionaire lifestyle immediately, and now you are blaming me for trying to secure it. I expected you to secure it legally." Paige roared, her face turning a deep blotchy red. "I expected my husband to actually own the company he was selling for $90 billion. You lied to me, Henry. You sat in my father's study and swore that you were the brilliant mind behind Apex Robotics. You swore that Tara was just a glorified assistant doing grunt work in the basement. You are a fraud. You are nothing but a pathetic empty suit." Henry lunged forward, grabbing Paige by the shoulders. "We are in this together, Paige. You are my wife. You stood in that motel room and explicitly admitted to the fraud right alongside me. If I go down for this, you are going down with me. We both confessed on that recording." Paige violently shoved him away, her expression twisting into pure, unadulterated hatred. "Do not ever touch me again," she hissed, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "My family has a team of the best defense attorneys in the United States. If you think for 1 second I am going to let you drag me into a federal prison cell because of your profound stupidity, you are completely insane. I will testify against you in a heartbeat. I will tell the authorities that you and your manipulative parents orchestrated this entire scheme and lied to me about the patent ownership. I will throw you to the wolves to save myself." Henry stared at his wife, completely betrayed and utterly broken. The unified alliance they had formed to crush me was fracturing right in front of my security cameras. The crushing pressure of the looming federal— "We have to call my parents," Henry muttered desperately, pulling out his phone. "My father will know what to do. He always knows how to handle Tara. He will talk her down. He has to. Your father is a delusional megachurch pastor who thinks he can pray away a Securities and Exchange Commission investigation." Paige spat viciously, turning her back on him. "Call whoever you want, Henry. But you better fix this by tonight, or I am calling my father's lawyers and filing for divorce before the federal agents show up at our door." I watched them get into the car in silence. The Lamborghini sped out of the parking lot, leaving a cloud of dust. The war had begun. The dust from Henry's customized sports car had barely settled on the cracked asphalt when my secondary burner phone began to ring. I had purchased this specific mobile device several months ago, linking its highly encrypted number exclusively to the Public Business Registry of Novacor LLC. Only a highly skilled corporate investigator digging through complex state filings would ever be able to find it. I walked into the motel room, picked up the ringing phone, and looked closely at the caller ID. It displayed a restricted corporate number originating from San Francisco. Titan Dynamics was moving exactly as fast as I had originally anticipated. I cleared my throat, straightened my posture, despite being completely alone in the room, and answered the call. "This is Tara speaking," I said, my voice projecting absolute corporate authority. "Miss Tara, good afternoon. This is the Chief Executive Officer of Titan Dynamics." His voice was remarkably calm, completely devoid of the chaotic panic that had just consumed my older brother. "I believe you and I have a $90 billion misunderstanding to resolve today." "It is not a misunderstanding, sir," I replied smoothly, pacing across the stained motel carpet. "It is a deliberate, premeditated case of corporate fraud perpetrated by Apex Robotics. I assume your integration engineers have finally briefed you on the exact nature of the firewall lockdown." A low, appreciative chuckle came through the small speaker. "They did indeed. They also informed me that the encryption protocols you personally designed are among the most sophisticated pieces of software engineering they have ever encountered. My entire cybersecurity team has been trying to crack your biometric firewall for the past 4 hours. They have made absolutely zero progress. You have single-handedly paralyzed the most advanced medical hardware currently on the global market. I built the artificial intelligence to be entirely impenetrable to any unauthorized access," I stated proudly. "Apex Robotics only owns the cheap metal casings and the basic hydraulic servos. I own the brain." "I know," the executive said, his tone shifting into one of profound, genuine respect. "After my disastrous meeting with your brother this morning, I ordered my elite legal team to bypass his incompetent explanations entirely. We ran a deep dive trace on Novacor LLC. We found your name listed on every single patent filing. We reviewed the official timestamps. We realized that Henry is nothing more than a loud, empty vessel who tried to sell us a stolen masterpiece. You are the true architect, Tara. You are the brilliant genius we actually want to acquire." Hearing a billionaire tech mogul validate my life's work sent a powerful, exhilarating rush of adrenaline straight through my veins. For 4 grueling years, my parents had relentlessly dismissed my brilliant mind as a mere hobby. They had forced me to sit in complete silence while Henry accepted prestigious awards and posed for magazine covers using my specific technical achievements. Now, the most powerful man in the room was completely ignoring my toxic family and treating me like an absolute equal. "I appreciate your recognition," I said, keeping my overwhelming emotions perfectly concealed. "But your acknowledgement does not change the fact that your acquisition contract with Apex Robotics is fundamentally fraudulent. I am fully prepared to file a comprehensive whistleblower report with the Securities and Exchange Commission tonight if my intellectual property is not immediately respected." "There will be no need for federal whistleblowers today, Tara," he assured me quickly and firmly. "Titan Dynamics has no interest in purchasing stolen goods, and we have zero intention of going down with your brother's sinking ship. I am officially inviting you to our regional headquarters here in Atlanta right now. I want you to walk into my executive boardroom, sit at my table, and negotiate directly with me. We have the capital and you have the software. Let us cut the dead weight out of this equation entirely." I looked at the cheap peeling wallpaper of the filthy motel room. The days of hiding in the shadows and accepting the scraps my family threw at me were officially over forever. I was finally being invited to the main table, not as an afterthought, but as the most powerful player in the entire game. "I will be there in 2 hours," I promised. "But you need to know that my family is currently scrambling. They are desperate, and they will likely try to crash this meeting to save themselves from federal prison." "Let them try," the executive replied coldly. "My building is highly secure. When you arrive, tell the front desk your full name. You will be treated as an elite guest. We will be waiting for you." The line went dead. I lowered the phone, a fierce, triumphant energy radiating through my entire body. The endgame was finally here. I quickly packed up my laptop and the heavy external hard drive, ensuring my encrypted files and the audio recording of Henry and Paige's confession were perfectly secure. I walked out of the motel, threw my bag into the passenger seat of my car, and drove straight to an upscale boutique in the financial district. If I was going to walk into the lion's den and claim my $90 billion empire, I absolutely refused to do it looking like a defeated victim. Paige had called me loud, ungraceful, and cheap. She had falsely claimed I did not belong among the elite. I was about to shatter that racist, elitist illusion into a million tiny pieces. I walked into the boutique and purchased a razor-sharp, perfectly tailored black power suit, a crisp silk blouse, and a pair of impeccable leather heels. I changed in the private fitting room, shedding the casual clothes I had worn during my humiliating eviction. When I looked in the full-length mirror, the woman staring back at me was utterly unrecognizable from the girl who used to seek her parents' validation. She was a self-made, fiercely intelligent architect of her own incredible destiny. I swiped on a bold shade of red lipstick, grabbed my leather briefcase, and confidently walked out the door. The drive to the Titan Dynamics regional headquarters took exactly 40 minutes. The towering glass and steel skyscraper dominated the downtown Atlanta skyline, reflecting the bright afternoon sun like a gleaming beacon. I parked my car and walked toward the massive revolving doors. My heart beat with a steady rhythmic throb. I carried no fear, only absolute, undeniable certainty. My family had spent my entire life trying to bury me under their monumental arrogance, but they had merely planted a seed. Now I was fully grown, and I was about to tear their entire fraudulent world down to its foundational roots. The heavy glass doors of Titan Dynamics slid open, granting me access to a world that had always been kept strictly out of my reach. I gripped the handle of my briefcase tightly and stepped confidently into the grand, shining marble lobby. The air inside the towering skyscraper was cool, crisp, and carrying the faint, intimidating scent of wealth and absolute corporate power. My black heels clicked rhythmically against the pristine floor, creating a sharp, commanding sound that echoed throughout the vast open space. I stood tall, feeling the impeccable fit of my new power suit, acting as impenetrable armor against the ghosts of my past. I was no longer the disheveled, exhausted data analyst hiding in a basement office. I was the sole owner of a technology worth $90 billion. It did not take me long to spot them. Huddled together near the massive, semicircular reception desk was my family. They looked entirely out of place, stripped of their megachurch authority, and reduced to desperate, frantic trespassers. Henry was sweating profusely, his bespoke Italian suit looking wrinkled and cheap under the bright, unforgiving lights of the corporate lobby. He leaned aggressively over the polished counter, waving his hands and practically begging the impassive reception staff. Paige stood tightly beside him, her usual arrogant posture completely replaced by a frantic, nervous energy. She aggressively tapped her expensive designer purse against her leg, her eyes darting around the room in pure panic. My parents. Pastor Marcus and Helen hovered anxiously a few steps behind them. They looked small, pathetic, and completely overwhelmed by the reality of their rapidly collapsing empire. "You do not seem to comprehend who I am," Henry shouted at the receptionist, his voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated panic. "I am the founder of Apex Robotics. We just finalized a $90 billion acquisition with your company yesterday. I demand to speak with the chief executive officer immediately. It is a matter of federal importance." The receptionist, a strikingly poised woman in a sharp gray uniform, did not even blink. She kept her eyes focused on her glowing monitor. "I apologize, sir," she replied in a perfectly flat, robotic tone. "But as I have informed you 4 times already, the executive team does not have you on their schedule today. You do not have an appointment, and I cannot grant you access to the secure elevators without explicit corporate authorization. I must ask you to step aside before I call security." "Do you know who my family is?" Paige shrieked, slamming her hand down on the marble counter. "We are the Vanguard estate. You are making a catastrophic career mistake by keeping us waiting in this lobby like common delivery workers." I walked smoothly toward the desk, letting my commanding presence be known. Helen was the very first person to spot me. Her eyes widened in absolute shock as she took in my sudden transformation. I was no longer the quiet, obedient girl they were so accustomed to bullying. I wore a razor-sharp, perfectly tailored black power suit that radiated absolute dominance. My shoulders were pulled back and my bold red lipstick framed a cool, predatory smile. "Tara," Helen gasped, her voice barely a hollow whisper. She reached out to grab my father's arm. "Marcus, look." Henry and Paige whipped their heads around. The blood drained completely from Henry's sweaty face. For a fraction of a second, he looked like a terrified child caught in a massive lie. But then his fragile ego violently took over and he lunged toward me, his face twisting into a mask of ugly, desperate rage. "What the hell are you doing here?" Henry hissed, stepping directly into my path to block my way to the reception desk. "Did you actually think you could just walk into this building and beg for a job? They froze our money, Tara. They are threatening us with federal prison, and it is entirely your fault. Give me the decryption keys right now, or I swear to God I will have you arrested." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at him with profound, icy pity. "You are blocking my path, Henry," I stated clearly, my voice projecting across the quiet lobby. "I highly suggest you move." "You are not going anywhere," Paige snarled, stepping up right beside her husband and glaring at me. "You think putting on a cheap suit makes you powerful? You are a fraud. We are going to march upstairs, and you are going to tell their legal team that you made a massive clerical error. You will sign the transfer forms today." "I am afraid you are deeply mistaken about who holds the power in this building." "Paige," I replied, maintaining unbroken eye contact. I effortlessly sidestepped my brother and approached the reception desk. Henry tried to grab my arm, but one of the massive security guards immediately stepped forward, placing a heavy, threatening hand squarely on Henry's chest to push him back. "Do not touch her, sir," the guard warned darkly. I turned my attention to the receptionist, who was already smiling at me with genuine professional respect. "Good afternoon," I said smoothly. "My name is Tara. I believe your chief executive officer is expecting me for a private negotiation regarding the Novacore patents." The receptionist immediately stood up from her chair, her demeanor shifting from cold dismissal to absolute welcoming reverence. "Yes, Miss Tara," she said warmly, completely ignoring my stunned family standing just inches away. "We have been eagerly expecting your arrival. The executive team has instructed me to grant you full unrestricted clearance. Please follow me. I will escort you directly to the private executive elevators. They have prepared the primary boardroom exclusively for your meeting." I nodded politely and followed her. Behind me, my family erupted into a chaotic, humiliating frenzy. "Wait a minute," Henry shouted. "She is my sister." The heavy elevator doors sealed shut. "My real negotiation starts now." The elevator glided upward, and when the doors parted, I stepped out onto the top floor of Titan Dynamics. A senior assistant guided me into the primary boardroom, a cavernous space dominated by a massive table carved from black walnut. The chief executive officer stood at the far end, surrounded by his elite integration engineers and a formidable legal team. The tension in the room was palpable, buzzing with the electric energy of a multi-billion-dollar crisis waiting to be resolved. He gestured to the empty chair directly across from him. I took my seat, placing my leather briefcase on the table with deliberate precision. We wasted no time on pleasantries. The negotiation commenced with a sharp, rigorous exchange of terms. I outlined my demands, clearly specifying that Novacore would remain a fiercely independent entity and that Titan Dynamics would be licensing the software, not purchasing it outright. The executives listened intently, taking meticulous notes and realizing very quickly that I was not a naive, inexperienced coder they could easily manipulate. We were diving deep into the financial structuring, discussing the complex royalties associated with the global deployment of the artificial intelligence, when a sudden violent commotion erupted from the outer hallway. Muffled shouts echoed through the thick glass walls, followed by the unmistakable sound of a heavy, chaotic scuffle. The heavy boardroom doors burst open with a deafening crash, bouncing hard against the wall. Henry stumbled into the room, his bespoke suit completely rumpled, and his face flushed a dangerous, volatile shade of crimson. Paige was right behind him, aggressively shoving past a bewildered security guard who had clearly been overwhelmed by their sudden, frantic charge. My parents, Marcus and Helen, trailed awkwardly in the doorway, panting heavily from the physical exertion of breaching the restricted executive floor. The Titan Dynamics security team rushed in, reaching out to physically restrain Henry's arms. But the chief executive officer held up a single hand, signaling his men to stand down. He wanted to see exactly how this absurd spectacle would play out. I did not flinch or rise from my chair. I simply leaned back, folding my hands neatly in my lap. Henry marched toward the table, pointing a violently shaking finger directly at my face. He opened his mouth to scream, but Paige sharply pushed him aside, positioning herself at the forefront of the aggressive attack. She slammed her hands down on the polished black walnut, glaring at the Titan executives with an expression of desperate concern. "You cannot listen to a single word this deceitful woman says," Paige shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the cavernous room. "She is a rogue hacker. She is a deeply disturbed, bitter individual who is actively trying to hold our loving family hostage. Tara has spent her entire miserable life resenting her brother's incredible success. When she realized Henry was about to close this monumental $90 billion deal, she launched a malicious cyber attack against our servers to hijack the medical robots. She is trying to extort us for money she absolutely did not earn. She is a criminal and she is lying to all of you to destroy our legacy." Helen pushed her way into the room, clutching her chest and attempting to summon real tears. "It breaks a mother's heart to say this," Helen cried out, playing the grieving matriarch to absolute perfection. "But our daughter is mentally unstable. She stole company property. She locked us out of our own systems just to ruin her brother. Please, gentlemen, do not let this jealous, vindictive girl destroy the magnificent empire my son has built." Marcus nodded solemnly, placing a comforting hand on his wife's shoulder. "We are simply a God-fearing family, trying to conduct honest business," my father added, his deep voice thick with practiced holy sincerity. "Tara has completely lost her way. We ask that you ignore her extortion attempts and allow us to provide you with the access keys as soon as we regain control of our compromised servers." The chief executive officer looked at Paige, then at my parents, and finally shifted his penetrating gaze back to me. He remained perfectly silent, waiting to see exactly how I would handle this blatant, vicious character assassination. I reached into my blazer pocket and slowly pulled out my cell phone. I placed it squarely in the center of the massive table. I did not raise my voice or offer any emotional defense against their ridiculous, desperate accusations. "You claim that I am a rogue hacker attempting to extort my family," I stated calmly, looking directly into Paige's furious eyes. "You claim that Apex Robotics legally owns the predictive medical analytics algorithm and that I stole it out of pure malicious jealousy." I tapped the screen of my phone, unlocking the device and navigating past the encrypted firewall, opening the voice recording application. I made sure every single person in the room was paying absolute attention to the small device resting on the black walnut surface. "Let us allow the room to hear exactly what you truly believe." I pressed the play button and maximized the volume to its highest setting. The crystal-clear audio from my cheap, dingy motel room filled the silent boardroom. Paige's shrill, unmistakable voice blasted from the phone speaker. "We knew you did not have the official employment paperwork. We knew you were not on the payroll. We did not care. You were just a useful tool, a convenient family member we could use to build the product. We knew we did not legally own the patents, but we sold them anyway, because we knew we could just crush you in court if you ever dared to speak up." Then Henry's arrogant, booming voice echoed right behind hers. "We sold the entire package because we knew we could handle a minor technicality, like your missing signature later. You are going to sign that transfer form right now, or our attorneys will destroy your entire existence." I stopped the recording and placed the phone back into my pocket. I looked up at my family. The color had completely drained from Paige's face. She looked as if she had just been physically struck by a freight train. Henry's jaw dropped open in absolute paralyzed horror. The arrogant posture he had carried into the room completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified hollow shell of a man. Helen and Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, their mouths agape, realizing their pristine, holy reputation had just been shattered into a million irreparable pieces in front of the most powerful corporate executives in the nation. The boardroom fell dead silent. The Titan Dynamics legal team stared at Henry with expressions of pure, unadulterated disgust. The chief executive officer leaned back in his leather chair, a cold, predatory smile slowly forming on his face. The undeniable proof of their federal fraud had just been broadcast for everyone to hear, and there was absolutely no escape from the devastating consequences. Their entire web of deceit, built on a foundation of entitlement and racism, was completely exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Paige's wealthy family attorneys could not save her now. My father's megachurch congregation could not pray this away. They had walked right into the trap I had carefully set for them. The suffocating silence inside the boardroom lasted for exactly 10 agonizing seconds. Every single person in the room watched the absolute destruction of Henry's carefully manufactured reality. The golden child, the brilliant chief executive officer, the anointed heir to our family empire, was visibly disintegrating right before my eyes. Henry stared at my cell phone resting on the black walnut table as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but his usually slick silver tongue could not form a single coherent excuse. He looked frantically toward his wife, desperately seeking a lifeline. Paige was completely paralyzed. The arrogant smirk she had worn like a crown for the past 4 years had entirely vanished, replaced by the stark, undeniable terror of a woman who knew she was about to lose her elite social standing and her freedom. The chief executive officer of Titan Dynamics slowly sat forward. He placed his hands flat on the table, his eyes locked onto my brother with lethal precision. "You brought a stolen company into my boardroom, Henry." The executive stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded absolute authority. "You explicitly lied to my legal team. You lied to my integration engineers. And you just confessed to committing federal securities fraud on a crystal-clear audio recording. Did you honestly believe we would not thoroughly investigate the intellectual property architecture before wiring $90 billion into your personal bank accounts?" That was the breaking point. The reality of his catastrophic failure finally snapped the last fragile thread of Henry's sanity. His face turned a deep, volatile shade of purple, the veins in his neck bulging violently against his expensive silk collar. He let out a raw, guttural scream of pure, unadulterated rage. It was not the sound of a calculating businessman. It was the sound of a spoiled, entitled child who had finally been told no. "You ruined everything!" Henry roared, his voice echoing violently off the thick glass walls. "You loud, jealous, pathetic bitch, I will kill you!" He lunged directly across the room. He completely bypassed the empty chairs, throwing his entire body weight forward with his hands outstretched toward my throat. I did not flinch. I did not scream. I did not even move out of my chair. I simply watched him charge, knowing exactly what was about to happen next. Before Henry could even cross half the distance between us, the two massive Titan Dynamics corporate security guards sprang into immediate action. They moved with terrifying practiced efficiency. The first guard intercepted Henry, driving a heavy shoulder directly into his chest. The impact knocked the wind out of my brother with a loud, sickening thud. The second guard grabbed Henry by the arm, twisting it sharply behind his back. Together they slammed the golden child of the Apex Robotics empire face first onto the pristine corporate carpet. Henry thrashed wildly, screaming obscenities and kicking his expensive leather shoes against the floor, but the guards pinned him down effortlessly. They pressed their knees firmly into his back, completely immobilizing him. My mother let out a piercing, hysterical shriek, rushing forward to help her precious son. But a third security officer quickly stepped into her path, blocking her advance with a stern, impenetrable wall of muscle. "Stand back immediately, ma'am," the officer ordered, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. My father stood frozen, his pastoral authority completely useless in the face of actual corporate power. I calmly reached down and picked up my leather briefcase from the floor. I placed it squarely on the table right next to my cell phone. The brass clasps clicked loudly in the tense, heavy atmosphere. I opened the lid and pulled out a thick, professionally bound stack of financial documents. I slid the heavy folder across the polished black walnut surface until it stopped directly in front of the Titan Dynamics Chief Executive Officer. "While we are on the subject of my brother's extraordinary leadership skills," I said, my voice projecting clearly over Henry's muffled, breathless curses from the floor, "I thought your legal team might appreciate a comprehensive look at the internal financial audit I conducted on Apex Robotics over the past 6 months. I highly recommend turning to page 42. The Titan executive opened the folder, his eyes quickly scanning the detailed spreadsheets and bank transaction records I had meticulously compiled. The lead corporate attorney leaned over his shoulder, her eyes widening in disbelief as she read the staggering numbers. "What is this?" the executive asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the devastating answer. "That is the undisputed proof of my brother's profound incompetence and blatant thievery," I explained, maintaining perfect eye contact with the executives. "Henry did not just try to sell you stolen intellectual property today. He has been actively embezzling research and development funds from Apex Robotics for the past 3 years. You will see highly detailed timestamp transfers routing millions of corporate dollars directly into dummy accounts controlled by his wife." Paige gasped loudly, stumbling backward until her back hit the boardroom wall. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes darting frantically toward the heavy oak doors. "You will notice," I continued, articulating every single syllable with lethal precision, "that the money intended to purchase upgraded server infrastructure and advanced diagnostic testing equipment was instead utilized to fund Paige's extensive designer shopping sprees in Paris and Milan. He used company funds to purchase her diamond jewelry, lease luxury vehicles, and maintain their elite country club memberships. My brother is not a brilliant technology pioneer. He is a violent, incompetent thief who stole from his own company to fund a fraudulent, hollow lifestyle." The silence that followed was absolute. The myth of the flawless, brilliant golden son was entirely eradicated. He was pinned to the floor, gasping for air, exposed as a pathetic criminal in front of everyone. They finally saw his true, utterly despicable human nature. The chief executive officer of Titan Dynamics closed the financial audit folder with a sharp, definitive snap that echoed like a gunshot across the cavernous boardroom. He did not look at the staggering numbers anymore. He did not need to. The sheer scale of the embezzlement and corporate fraud was permanently burned into the minds of every single corporate attorney and integration engineer sitting at the long mahogany table. He slowly stood up from his luxurious leather chair, adjusting his impeccably tailored suit jacket. He looked down at my brother, who was still securely pinned to the pristine carpet by the massive security guards, gasping for breath and completely stripped of his golden child facade. "You are a remarkably foolish man, Henry," the executive stated, his voice radiating a chilling, absolute disgust that made the room temperature plummet. "You did not just attempt to defraud a publicly traded company out of $90 billion. You stole millions from your own research and development budget to buy designer handbags and luxury sports cars, and you explicitly documented your own federal crimes on a digital ledger. My legal team is currently forwarding this comprehensive audit, along with the audio recording of your blatant confession, directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Paige let out a high, terrified shriek, frantically pressing her back against the thick glass wall as if she could somehow phase right through it and escape. "I had absolutely nothing to do with this," Paige screamed, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated desperation. She pointed a shaking finger at her husband on the floor. "He lied to me. He told me the company was generating massive profits. I did not know the money was stolen from the engineering budget. You cannot send me to federal prison. I am a member of the Vanguard estate." The lead corporate attorney for Titan Dynamics did not even bother to look up from her notes. "Your name is the primary beneficiary on every single offshore dummy account listed in this audit, ma'am," the attorney replied with lethal surgical precision. "You are just as legally culpable as your husband. I highly suggest you save your breath for your criminal defense lawyer because you are definitely going to need one." My mother Helen completely abandoned her pristine, holy matriarch persona. She dropped to her knees right there in the executive boardroom, clasping her hands together in a frantic theatrical display of religious pleading. "Please, sir, you must show some mercy." Helen cried out, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. We are a righteous, God-fearing family. We run a deeply respected church in this community. If you report my son to the federal authorities, you will completely destroy our congregation. You will ruin our flawless reputation. Henry just made a simple mistake. He is a good boy. My father, pastor. Marcus stepped forward, attempting to summon his booming pulpit voice to save his crumbling empire. We can make this right, my father pleaded, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. We will return the advance money immediately. We will walk away from the acquisition. Just let us leave this building quietly, and we will handle our daughter internally. The chief executive officer let out a harsh, mocking laugh that completely shattered my father's remaining authority. You are in absolutely no position to handle anything, Pastor, the executive fired back, his eyes narrowing with intense predatory contempt. You sat in this exact room just a few days ago and confidently tried to sell me a worthless, empty shell of a company. You stood by and actively encouraged your son to steal his own sister's intellectual property. Your pristine family reputation is nothing but a cheap, fraudulent illusion, and I have absolutely zero patience for corporate thieves. The executive turned his attention to the head of his security detail. He gave a sharp, commanding nod. Get these people out of my sight, the chief executive officer ordered. Escort them to the ground floor, throw them out onto the street, and ensure they are permanently banned from entering any Titan Dynamics facility worldwide. If they resist, call the local police and have them immediately arrested for trespassing. The security guards hauled Henry up from the carpet, roughly twisting his arms behind his back. My brother did not fight back this time. He was completely limp, a broken, defeated man, staring blankly at the floor as the reality of his impending federal indictment crushed his fragile spirit. Two more guards moved in, aggressively corralling Paige, Helen, and Marcus toward the heavy oak doors. Paige was sobbing, hysterically screaming about her ruined social standing and her impending divorce. Helen was wailing loudly, begging God to intervene and save her precious son from the consequences of his own actions. Marcus looked completely hollowed out. His shoulders slumped as his entire world collapsed around him. Right before they were forcefully dragged out into the hallway, the chief executive officer stepped forward, commanding their attention one final time. He looked at my terrified, ruined family with a gaze so cold it could freeze water. We do not pay $90 billion for scrap metal, he stated, his voice ringing with absolute, undeniable power. We pay for brains. He turned his back on them completely, entirely, ignoring their chaotic, screaming protests, as the heavy boardroom doors were firmly slammed shut by the security team. The sudden silence in the room was incredibly profound. The toxic, suffocating presence of my family was finally gone, permanently eradicated from my professional sphere. The executive walked back to his chair and sat down. He smoothed his tie, took a deep breath, and completely shifted his demeanor from a hostile corporate executioner to a highly respectful, eager business partner. He turned his chair entirely toward me, clasping his hands together on the polished black walnut table. Now, Miss Tara, he said, let us talk about licensing your software. I nodded. The hostile tension that had previously suffocated the space evaporated, replaced by the sharp energy of a genuine corporate negotiation. The chief executive officer folded his hands on the polished black walnut table, looking at me with an expression of profound respect. I must admit, Tara, you executed that maneuver perfectly, the executive stated. You allowed your brother to dig his own grave and you handed us the shovel. You saved us from a catastrophic legal nightmare. Now let us discuss the acquisition of Nova Core. We are prepared to offer you the original $90 billion to purchase your company and all associated intellectual property outright. I leaned back in my leather chair. I did not let the staggering number faze me. I appreciate the offer, but I am not selling my company, I replied with absolute certainty. Nova Core is not for sale. I am not handing over the keys to my kingdom just to walk away with a lump sum, no matter how astronomically large that sum might be. The lead corporate attorney adjusted her glasses, looking slightly perplexed. Miss Tara, $90 billion is an unprecedented valuation. You would instantly become one of the wealthiest individuals on the planet. Why would you refuse a complete buyout? Because I understand the true value of what I built, I explained. My medical analytics algorithm is not a static product. It is a continuously evolving artificial intelligence framework. It will adapt, learn, and expand. If I sell NovaCore, I lose control over its future development. I did not spend 4 years writing that code in the dark just to hand it over. I want to partner with you, but I refuse to work for you. The executive leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. What exactly are you proposing? I am proposing a comprehensive intellectual property licensing agreement, I stated, opening my briefcase and pulling out a drafted legal document. I slid it across the table. Titan Dynamics will pay me the $90 billion upfront. However, this payment is not an acquisition fee. It is an exclusive perpetual licensing fee. You secure the absolute exclusive rights to integrate my artificial intelligence into your global fleet of medical robots. No competitor in the healthcare hardware market will ever touch my software. The corporate attorneys began hastily scanning the document, their eyes widening at the meticulous ironclad legal structure I had independently designed. But that is not all, I continued. In addition to the $90 billion upfront licensing fee, NovaCore will receive an ongoing 5% royalty on all future global sales and subscriptions related to any medical hardware utilizing my algorithms. You get the exclusive rights to deploy the brain, and I get a permanent percentage of the profits it generates. A stunned silence washed over the boardroom. The sheer audacity of the proposed deal hung heavily in the air. I was not just demanding a massive fortune. I was demanding perpetual wealth and maintaining total ownership of my intellectual property. The chief executive officer looked at his lead attorney. Are these terms legally sound? He asked quietly. The attorney nodded slowly. The contract is flawless. It fully protects Titan Dynamics from any intellectual property disputes, while completely insulating her company from our hardware liabilities. It is a masterclass in corporate structuring. The executive turned his gaze back to me. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He was not looking at a desperate, socially awkward data typist. He was looking at a fierce, visionary peer. Your family called you loud and ungraceful, he remarked, shaking his head. They were completely blinded by their own profound arrogance. You are the most brilliant strategist I have ever met in my entire career. You know exactly what you hold, and you know exactly how to leverage it. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a heavy silver fountain pen. Titan Dynamics accepts your terms in full. Tara, he announced loudly, his voice echoing with absolute finality. We will execute the $90 billion transfer directly into the secure corporate accounts of NovaCore LLC before the close of business today. The 5% global royalty clause will be activated immediately upon the deployment of the first robotic unit. He signed his name with a decisive flourish on the bottom of the licensing agreement. He slid the document back across the table, offering me the silver pen. My hand did not tremble. I took the pen, feeling the metal against my skin. I thought about the tiny motel room where I had spent the weekend fortifying my digital defenses. I thought about the years of silent, unrewarded labor constantly overshadowed by a brother who could barely comprehend my work. I thought about the hateful insults hurled at me by my own flesh and blood. I channeled every ounce of that pain, that betrayal, and that determination directly into the tip of the pen. I signed my full name on the dotted line. The sound of the pen, scratching against the crisp paper, was the sweetest sound I had ever heard in my entire life. I capped the pen and pushed the finalized contract back across the table. In that single moment, the transformation was absolutely complete. I had officially cemented my victory through pure intellect, unyielding legal strategy, and flawless execution. I was no longer the discarded scapegoat of a deeply toxic, manipulative family. I was a self-made, vastly powerful billionaire. The chief executive officer stood up and extended his hand toward me. I stood up, smoothing the front of my black power suit, and shook his hand firmly. The corporate attorneys and integration engineers around the room immediately stood up as well, offering a resounding, deeply respectful round of applause. They were applauding my mind, my resilience, and my total triumph. I walked into the den surrounded by enemies, and I was walking out as the undisputed queen of a $90 billion empire. The elevator ride down to the ground floor felt like descending from Mount Olympus. When the polished steel doors glided open, the expansive marble lobby of Titan Dynamics was no longer just a corporate entryway. It was the site of a spectacular, catastrophic ruin. Through the towering floor-to-ceiling glass windows, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the executive parking lot. My family had not left the premises. They were physically incapable of leaving, trapped in the gravitational pull of their own monumental failure. I stood quietly inside the climate-controlled lobby, watching the chaos unfold under the harsh, unforgiving afternoon sun. Henry was leaning heavily against his customized Lamborghini, the very same car he had bragged about purchasing just yesterday with stolen money. He looked entirely broken, clutching his cell phone to his ear, desperately barking orders to lawyers who were undoubtedly hanging up on him. The reality of a multi-billion-dollar breach of contract lawsuit from Titan Dynamics, coupled with imminent Securities and Exchange Commission indictments, was finally crushing his chest. Paige was pacing frantically back and forth across the hot asphalt. Her pristine white designer suit was wrinkled, and her perfectly styled hair was clinging to her sweaty face. She was screaming at the top of her lungs, her shrill voice faintly penetrating the thick glass of the lobby. She waved her phone frantically in the air. I could easily deduce what was happening. Her elite, extremely wealthy family had just cut the cord. Paige suddenly stopped pacing. She marched directly up to my brother, her face twisted into a mask of absolute, unadulterated hatred. Henry reached out, perhaps trying to offer a pathetic, pleading apology, but Paige violently slapped his hands away. She grabbed her left hand and aggressively yanked the massive multi-million-dollar diamond wedding ring off her finger. With a scream of pure fury, she threw the heavy diamond directly at Henry's face. The ring bounced off his cheek and clattered into the dirty gutter. "I am filing for divorce this exact second," Paige roared, her voice carrying through the heavy glass doors as a security guard entered the building. "My father's legal team is already drafting the paperwork. You lied to me. You ruined my life. You are a federal criminal and you are never touching me or my family's money ever again." She did not wait for his response. Paige spun around on her expensive heels, flagged down a passing luxury taxi, and threw herself into the back seat. The cab sped away, leaving Henry standing completely alone next to a supercar he could no longer afford. Within an hour, her powerful family would release a brutal, highly coordinated press statement to every major media outlet in the country. The Vanguard estate publicly and entirely disowned Henry, expressing their profound disgust at his fraudulent business practices and explicitly distancing their pristine socialite reputation from his impending federal prosecution. But the absolute destruction of the Golden Child was only the beginning of the immediate fallout. My parents, Pastor Marcus and Helen, were standing a few yards away from Henry, watching their beloved daughter-in-law flee the scene. Their grand manufactured illusions of immense wealth and untouchable holy power were rapidly disintegrating into a pile of toxic ash. My father's phone began to ring endlessly. I watched him answer it, his shoulders slumping further toward the pavement with every single passing second. It was not his church elders calling to offer spiritual support. It was the Internal Revenue Service. The highly detailed financial audit I had handed over to the Titan Dynamics legal team did not merely expose Henry's rampant embezzlement of corporate research and development funds. It also documented the incredibly murky, highly illegal financial overlap between Apex Robotics and the Greater Hope Cathedral. For the past 4 years, Marcus and Helen had been quietly mixing untaxed charitable church donations with Apex's fraudulent corporate accounts. They had deliberately laundered money through the megachurch's youth programs and global missionary funds to artificially inflate the apparent profitability of Henry's failing robotics company. They had actively stolen from their own devoted congregation to desperately maintain the illusion of their son's elite business genius. The Titan Dynamics lawyers, fulfilling their legal obligation to report massive financial crimes, had immediately forwarded the damning audit to federal tax authorities. The Internal Revenue Service does not waste time when dealing with multi-million-dollar charity fraud. Helen dropped her designer handbag onto the dirty parking lot pavement. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, as Marcus explained the horrifying reality of their situation. Their massive, sprawling social empire was crumbling into dust right before their eyes. The 5,000 devoted church members who had cheered for my downfall on Sunday morning would soon discover that their beloved, righteous pastor had been systematically stealing their hard-earned tithes to fund his son's lavish, fraudulent lifestyle. The Greater Hope Cathedral was facing an immediate, ruthless federal audit. The church's bank accounts were already being frozen by government agents. The massive glass stage, the golden microphones, and the perfectly curated television broadcasts were going to be permanently shut down. Marcus and Helen were not just losing their church, they were facing inevitable federal charges for massive tax evasion and charity fraud. The highly respected, incredibly powerful matriarch and patriarch of the community were about to be globally exposed as common manipulative thieves. I watched them stand in the parking lot, completely ruined and utterly abandoned by the high society they had worshipped so deeply. They had built their entire lives on a foundation of lies, entitlement, and the ruthless exploitation of their own daughter. Now the overwhelming weight of their collective sins was finally pulling them down into the dark abyss. I turned away from the glass windows feeling absolutely no pity, no regret, and no sorrow. I walked out of a side exit, stepping into the bright, warm afternoon sun. I was finally entirely and wonderfully free. The transition from the suffocating toxicity of my past into the expansive reality of my present happened flawlessly. Within 3 days of signing the monumental licensing agreement with Titan Dynamics, I closed a cash deal on a spectacular penthouse suite located in the heart of Midtown Atlanta. The residence occupied the entire top floor of a heavily fortified residential tower, boasting private elevator access round the clock, armed security, and panoramic views of the city skyline. I furnished the massive space with sleek, modern pieces that reflected my own personal taste, entirely discarding the heavy, ostentatious, and incredibly restrictive aesthetic my parents had always forced upon me. I was sipping a cup of artisanal black coffee on my sweeping glass balcony, reviewing the initial phenomenal sales data for the newly deployed medical robots, when my private intercom system suddenly buzzed with a sharp, insistent tone. I walked over to the marble wall console and pressed the glowing green button. The head of building security spoke through the crisp audio feed, his voice laced with professional caution. He informed me that 2 older individuals claiming to be my parents were currently standing on the public sidewalk just outside the main security gates. They had desperately attempted to bypass the front desk and were currently causing a significant disturbance, demanding immediate access to my private residence. The security chief asked if I wanted him to dispatch the local police to have them removed for loitering and harassment. I stared at the high-definition security monitor mounted on the wall. The live camera feed displayed Pastor Marcus and Helen pacing frantically on the cold concrete. They looked absolutely wretched. Their designer clothes were deeply wrinkled, their posture was entirely defeated, and the arrogant, holy confidence they had wielded like a weapon for decades had completely evaporated. I instructed the security chief to hold off on calling the police. I wanted to handle this final pathetic intrusion myself. I took a slow, deep breath, smoothing down my tailored silk blouse, and took the private elevator directly down to the ground floor. The heavy bulletproof glass doors of the lobby slid open, and I stepped out onto the sunlit sidewalk. The humid Atlanta air hit me instantly, but it was nothing compared to the suffocating wave of pure desperation rolling off my parents. The moment Helen spotted me walking past the armed security guards, her knees visibly buckled. She practically threw herself onto the hard, dirty pavement, completely ignoring the stunned stares of wealthy pedestrians walking past us. My father, the supposedly great and powerful community leader, immediately dropped down right beside her. They were literally kneeling at my feet, their hands clasped tightly together in a theatrical, agonizing display of total surrender. "Tara, please," Helen wailed, her voice cracking with raw, unadulterated terror. "You have to help us. You are our only daughter, and you are the only person on this entire earth who can save our lives right now." I looked down at the two people who had gleefully authorized my exile just a few weeks ago. I felt absolutely no pity stirring in my chest. "You are trespassing outside my private residence," I stated, my voice echoing with cold, impenetrable authority. "State your business quickly before I have you permanently removed from this block." Marcus reached out his trembling fingers, hovering just inches from my expensive leather shoes, though he did not dare to actually touch me. "The Internal Revenue Service has completely frozen every single bank account associated with the church and our personal estate." My father pleaded, tears streaming freely down his wrinkled face. "The federal investigators are tearing through decades of financial records. They are preparing to indict us for massive tax evasion and charity fraud by the end of the week. We have absolutely no money left to hire defense attorneys. The bank is foreclosing on our home tomorrow morning. We are going to lose everything, Tara. We are going to spend the rest of our lives rotting inside a federal prison cell." "That sounds like a severe legal problem," I replied, my expression remaining perfectly blank. "But I fail to see how your impending federal incarceration involves me in any capacity." "You have billions of dollars!" Helen screamed, sobbing so violently that her entire body shook against the concrete. "You can buy Apex Robotics. You can purchase the remaining hardware and the manufacturing facilities. The metal shells are still worth something. If you buy the physical company from us, we can use that capital to pay off the federal tax penalties and negotiate a plea deal to avoid prison time. You have more money than you could ever spend in 10 lifetimes. You can afford to throw us a lifeline. We are your family. We gave you life. You cannot just stand there and let us be destroyed." I stared down at them, absorbing the absolute pathetic reality of their desperate begging demands. They did not want to apologize for decades of emotional abuse. They did not feel genuine remorse for trying to steal my intellectual property. They simply wanted to use my hard-earned wealth as a convenient shield to escape the devastating consequences of their own fraudulent criminal behavior. I slowly shook my head, letting a cold, humorless smile touch the corners of my mouth. "I am just a loud, ungraceful data typist," I said, my voice cutting through the humid air with lethal surgical precision. "You made it abundantly clear that I do not possess the grace or the intellect required to operate at the elite billionaire level. You looked me dead in the eye and told me that failures have to bear their own consequences. I would not know the first thing about saving your company. I am entirely unqualified to manage your scrap metal." I turned my back on them. I walked inside, signaling the armed guards to secure the perimeter. I left them sobbing hysterically on the dirty, hot concrete sidewalk. I stepped back into the cool sanctuary of my lobby, leaving the agonizing sounds of my parents weeping entirely behind me. I did not look back. I stepped into my private elevator and rode it up to the penthouse. Over the next 6 months, my life transformed into a global phenomenon. I became the absolute center of the technological world. Today, the physical manifestation of that victory sat on my custom glass coffee table. It was the highly anticipated issue of Forbes magazine. Staring back at me from the glossy cover was my own face. I wore a sharp emerald green power suit radiating absolute unshakable confidence. The bold white headline printed right across my chest read, "The youngest black female self-made billionaire in tech." I picked up the magazine, running my fingers over the smooth, heavy paper. I thought about Paige telling me I was far too loud and ungraceful to ever blend in with the billionaire elite. I did not blend in with them at all. I completely redefined them. My success was no longer a hidden secret. It was an undeniable global reality that absolutely no one could ever ignore. Wealth without purpose is merely a different kind of empty cage. I had absolutely no intention of hoarding my $90 billion fortune just to buy empty mansions and depreciating supercars like my foolish brother. I wanted to build an impenetrable legacy that would actively dismantle the aggressive marginalization I had endured my entire life. Last month, I signed a massive historic endowment to my alma mater. I fully funded a state-of-the-art artificial intelligence research center directly on the beautiful campus of Spelman College. The facility was designed exclusively to recruit, train, and empower brilliant young women of color in the highly competitive fields of data analytics and machine learning. I made absolutely sure that no brilliant black woman would ever have to work as an unpaid, unappreciated ghost for a corrupt corporate entity. I provided them with the legal resources and the world-class technological infrastructure to own their brilliant creations from day one. I was actively replacing the toxic, patriarchal empire my father tried to build with an uplifting, unstoppable network of female innovators as the warm Georgia sun began to set, casting brilliant streaks of orange and purple across the vast Atlanta skyline. I walked over to my modern kitchen. I pulled a chilled bottle of vintage champagne from the refrigerator and poured myself a generous, bubbling glass. I walked back into my expansive living room, my bare feet sinking into the plush white carpet. I used a sleek remote control to activate the massive wall-sized flat-screen television mounted across the room. I took a slow, satisfying sip of the crisp champagne as the evening news broadcast flickered to life. I did not need to search for the specific channel. The catastrophic downfall of the Apex Robotics fraud was still dominating the national financial news cycle. The news anchor appeared on the screen, her expression somber and highly professional. Tonight, a stunning update in the corporate fraud scandal that rocked the tech industry, the anchor announced. The screen transitioned from the desk to high-definition live footage shot outside a towering federal courthouse. There he was. Henry was completely unrecognizable from the arrogant, perfectly groomed golden child who had relentlessly mocked me half a year ago. He was wearing a rumpled, cheap gray suit. His wrists were firmly secured in heavy steel handcuffs in front of him. Two stern, heavily armed federal agents flanked him aggressively, guiding him through a massive swarm of shouting reporters and flashing camera lenses. Henry kept his head completely bowed, his eyes glued to the concrete pavement. He looked absolutely terrified, utterly pathetic, and completely broken. The news ticker at the bottom of the screen flashed the brutal, inescapable reality. Former Apex Robotics executive indicted on multiple counts of securities fraud and grand larceny. The reporter's voiceover continued to detail the absolute destruction of his fraudulent life. The broadcast highlighted how his wealthy wife had immediately filed for a highly publicized divorce, leaving him to face the devastating multi-billion-dollar civil lawsuits completely alone. The news segment then briefly shifted to a different, equally satisfying catastrophe. The screen displayed footage of the Greater Hope Cathedral. The massive glass doors were chained shut, plastered with bright red federal seizure notices. My parents had lost absolutely everything. The Internal Revenue Service had meticulously dismantled their fraudulent money-laundering megachurch empire piece by piece. Marcus and Helen were currently awaiting their own brutal criminal trials for massive charity fraud, completely stripped of their stolen wealth and their precious, highly curated social standing. The community they had so maliciously weaponized against me had entirely abandoned them, leaving them to face the ruthless federal prosecutors without a single shred of sympathy or support. I took another slow, luxurious sip of my champagne, savoring the incredibly sweet, effervescent taste on my tongue. I watched the federal agents forcefully push my brother into the back of an armored transport vehicle. The heavy metal doors slammed shut, sealing his tragic self-inflicted fate forever. I reached out and turned off the television, instantly silencing the chaotic noise of their profound destruction. The massive penthouse returned to a state of absolute tranquil peace. I walked out onto my sweeping glass balcony, feeling the warm, gentle evening breeze brush against my face. The ultimate justice was not merely watching my abusers suffer the severe consequences of their own toxic criminal actions. The ultimate justice was looking out over the glittering, vibrant city and knowing with absolute unshakable certainty that my success was entirely undeniable. I had survived their betrayal, outsmarted their greed, and cemented an untouchable historic triumph. I was finally wonderfully free. Have you ever turned a massive family betrayal into your absolute greatest victory? Let me know your story in the comments down below. Please like and subscribe today. Goodbye.